Hey everybody, it's Tim from Linessa Farms, specialty and heirloom livestock. Thanks for joining us again today. Today was one of those days I like barely made it to the computer. We've been busy. We've got fair next week coming up. So we're preparing for fair, and we got lots of orders going out, and work's crazy. And I know you guys are probably everybody's busy. Sometimes it's hard to find the time to get out there with your animals and to do what you need to do, but boy, I'll tell you, we've talked about this in the past. There is just nothing better than getting out there every day, doing a walk, spending a little bit of time with your animals, and kind of seeing what's going on. The more you're out there, the more they get used to you, and the more they get used to you, the more you can work with them and take a look at them and see what's going on. And life just gets a whole lot easier that way. And the reality is all these animals have their own kind of personality, and the more time you're out there, the more likely you are to discover if something's wrong, or you'll know if they're acting off, or if something's just not right. Now obviously I'm not naive enough to think that for those of you that have 300-400 uh or 1,000 animals like that, you're going to be able to do this. But for all intents and purposes, at least you can go out and see if an animal is limping, or see if they're down or away from the pack or whatever. So, the name of the game with sheep and goats especially is when you see a problem, you have to act fast. You have to act immediately. And it's real easy to, just say, hey, they're limping. They must have twisted their foot in a mole hole, or, they're off feed, but they're probably just acting a little down today. Everything should be fine. If you spend that time, if you waste that time trying to make up excuses for why you shouldn't check out an animal that's not acting right, the next time you actually get out there, they could be completely down. So, they always say a sick sheep is a dead sheep, sick goat's a dead goat, and there is some truth to that, in the fact that the premise behind that saying is that a lot of times, by the time you realize that there's something wrong, something going on, it's too late. I am a firm believer that if you take the time to educate yourself and you catch things early enough, there's not a whole lot that's going to be thrown your way that you can't successfully navigate through. Now, obviously, all of these animals pass away at some point in time. There's a general life expectancy that you should expect. If you can get 10 good years out of actual breeding stock, that is acceptable. I get asked a lot, like, how old do these animals get? Boy, that's a tough one. A lot of it depends on how hard they're being bred, and how the conditions are, and how well they're fed, and everything else. I just recently had a customer that I just recently had a customer that had a boar buck that she bred every year, and it lived to be 22 years old, which just blew my mind. And I had remembered this buck from like he was old when I met him like 10 years ago. And I was talking to Mary is her name, and I was like, finally when he died, I was like, well, how old is he? And she's like, I think he's like 15 or 16 years old. And I said, there's no way. And she said, well, I got him when my daughter got married, and that was, and she gave me this date, and I'm like, Mary, that was 20 years ago. And she's like, oh my God. They can live a long time. I know Jeff Hunter, a good friend of mine that raises Poll Dorsets here in the US. Jeff has some good breeding ewes that are still putting out babies at 13, 14 years old. So, you know, it's all good. So we've already got some stuff up on the board that we'll address. Hello, John. Hi, Gabrielle. And hey, Brian. Brian, I've heard all my life a goat is just looking for a good place to die. Yep. Yeah, that's about right, for sure. So let's start off with John and see what John has going on. So John's got Dorper ewes. Man, really impressed with the Dorper ewes. We got some Dorpers in this year from West Texas, from Aaron Jennings. Aaron picked them up for me. I've got white Dorpers, brought them in, and I am really, really impressed with the body condition that these things are putting out for me on pasture. I will say this, I used to have some St. Croix, and I thought the St. Croix were like the wildest sheep I had ever dealt with in my life. But these Dorpers are absolutely nutty. They are the craziest sheep I have ever. I have never been rammed by a ewe before. I've had ewes like the St. Croix and the Katahdins. I've had them stomp their feet at me before. Um, so here's a fun story. So so these Dorper ewes, they came in, we trucked them in from West Texas. I went to meet a friend in West Lafayette, Indiana, near where Purdue University is, to pick them up. And we were trying to load them into a trailer, and they were wild. And you could get and they're strong, so you get your hands on them. And we got one ewe in the trailer, and we went to get the other ewe to get her in the trailer, and I cracked the door to get the second ewe in there, and the first ewe that was already in there put her head down and came at me and was trying to ram me. And if I wasn't paying attention, she would ram me right in the side of the head. And it just blew my mind. And so I thought, well, this is a fluke. She was just spooked and trying to get out of the trailer. Oh no. I brought her home and put her in a holding pen, and I went in there a few times and she came at me. And I was like, wow, this is pretty impressive. So I assume she's going to be my flock mama, I like to call them. In case you haven't noticed, like every flock has a flock mama, and it can be a goat or it can be a sheep. If you run your sheep and goats together, you may find that it's usually it may be a goat. It tends to be a goat that becomes the flock mama, but the flock mama, like, she rules the roost. Like, you may think the males, no. The flock mama is going to tell them where to go, where to eat, and you'll notice she'll always be in the front, and she will kind of lead them around. So the benefit is if you can identify your flock mama, then what you do is when you go out, if you ever have yourself in a situation where you have to move them and you feel like you're losing control, go after her. Make friends with your flock mama. And when you lose control, go after her and get her to go where you want her to go. And it'll take a lot of stress off the rest of the herd, and they'll tend to want to follow her. So that's just a, and you always got to give them like a name that sounds like it belongs to the flock mama. I know we have Stella is our Katahdin ewe. That's our flock mama right now. And then Mrs. French is our female goat. When you have multiple daughters like I do, every animal on your farm has a name. And that's just the way it goes. I won't bore you all with the names. So anyways, Dorper ewes, 3-month-old lamb on pasture. What's the best way to wean them off to get the ewes ready for fall breeding? So it depends on your setup. You can go a couple different routes. I like to have more than a single degree of separation between the moms and the babies. And what I say by that is I like to get them far enough away to where they don't have a single fence between them, because what'll end up happening is those babies they could potentially end up hurting themselves, because they'll try to get through that fence and get back into where their mom is. Now, we always say we want to move the moms. We don't want to move the babies, generally is our rule. However, if they're all out on pasture, sometimes what we'll do is we'll bring those babies up to dry lot. It just depends. It's so much depends on it, because you got to look at what's the least amount of stress on the babies, what's the most realistic. If you got really good pasture and you're trying to dry out those moms, but at the same time you've got those moms that are getting good pasture, they're putting on good milk because they've got plenty to eat, you may not want to leave them on pasture because they may not ever dry out appropriately for you. On the same token, do you really want to leave those babies out on pasture? And then at some point when you dry those moms out, you're going to have to put them back out. So I think the best thing for you to do might be, I think the best thing for you to do in your situation potentially could either be move the moms on dry lot, dry them out, and then after a few weeks swap, put them back out on pasture and take the babies off. That may be your best bet. You may also want to add, while you got those ewes on dry lot, you may want to feed them a little bit more nutrition, maybe a little bit of grain. If their body condition's down, like a lot of them are, like a lot of the good moms, their body condition kind of goes down when they're feeding. You may want to bring them up to dry a lot, let them dry out, let them get them comfortable and dried out. And once they're dried out good, then maybe get their body score, their body condition back up before you turn them back out on pasture. If you're happy with those lambs being out on pasture, leave them out there and move the moms up, get them straightened out, get them cleaned up, and then get them put back out. And then you can always bring those babies back up later. And that's the thing, I get a lot of messages from people, and I know a lot of you are like, you've already got kind of a plan in place. You just kind of want to bounce it off somebody and be like, yeah, sometimes it's just good for your mental health to talk to somebody else and say, hey, I've got this idea. What do you think? And I understand that, because every once in a while, somebody will say something that you're like, oh man, I didn't even think of that. So John, I'm sure you probably already got a plan in place. Just go with your gut, look at, how am I going to dry these moms off appropriately? How am I going to get their body condition back to where it needs to be? And how am I going to put the least amount of stress on these babies? And really, I think the best way to get that condition back on them is probably going to be, you're going to have to dry on them at some point if they're in bad shape. Of course, they're Dorpers, so their body condition may be fine. But still, you got to get them dried out, and be careful. When you guys are drying out your ewes and your does, first of all, they're always going to bag out a little bit more, and they're always going to look like, you're going to look at them and be like, oh man, they're really bagging out hard, and I may want to keep an eye on it. If the bag starts getting really red, if it starts getting really hot, anything weird like that, you start noticing any lumps or anything like that, put your hands on the bag, feel it. If it feels warm, if you feel like crackly underneath the skin, that's called crepitus. And what that is that's from bacteria in there, mastitis in there, that's growing, and it's releasing gas, and that gas is causing the sound. It sounds like Rice Krispies underneath the skin. And we call that crepitus. And if you're feeling and or hearing crepitus, that bag's really hot, and you're seeing any kind of discharge, then you gotta start doing antibiotic treatment really, really quick. And that can be very complex, and that can be something that you need to talk with your veterinarian about. Mastitis is, so a couple of things about mastitis. First of all, if you get an animal that's prone to mastitis, if they get it once, the chances of them getting it again are very, very high. It's very, very rare that we see an animal that gets, if you're drying them out correctly, because some of them you'll just run into them where it's like, okay, I did everything right and they still got it. If that's the case, it's going to happen again, and you really need to consider culling that animal. The other thing that you're going to notice is a bout of mastitis will almost always leave some kind of damage, and you'll be able to feel that after the ewe or doe has completely dried out. And if they can survive the mastitis and they completely dry out, what you'll feel in the bag later on is something that we would refer to as a granuloma. And a granuloma is just calcified, like a calcified nodule that's in there, and you'll feel it. You'll feel a lump, which is another great point. Since we're doing the live stream and we just jump all over the place, that's another good point about the granulomas. When you're buying ewes and you're buying does, don't be afraid to put your hands on the animal. You're not going to offend that seller. And if you offend them, then that's too bad. If you're going to spend money on this animal, you need to check it out. And that's one of the things you need to do with these females is you need to put your hands on their bag, and you need to, I'm not telling you to be rough, but you need to manipulate that bag and feel and squeeze a little bit and move around, because you want to feel for those lumps. If you feel a lump in there, a hard lump or a soft mass or whatever, I don't care if it's the size of a marble or the size of a golf ball, that's a real bad sign that they probably had some kind of prior infection, be it mastitis or something else. And that's a real good sign that either they're not going to be able to milk out of that side, or they're on their way to not being able to milk out of that side. Every once in a while, you'll find a ewe or a doe that'll have a granuloma. They'll still be able to milk partially out of that side, maybe for another year or so, but then it all goes to heck shortly after that. They tend to get worse, and you're going to lose milk. So it's something for you to consider. So John, hopefully I didn't run you through the deep weeds too far and lost you. Hopefully that makes sense. Keep me posted and see how things go. We don't keep our replacement ewes and our replacement does on pasture with our experienced ewes and does. We keep our replacement ewes and does. So these are lambs or goat kids that we intend to use as future breeders. We raise them by themselves. Um, because this allows us an opportunity to feed them a little bit better and to make sure that we're getting their growth potential where it needs to be. You can run into some serious problems if you haven't done this before. Be careful. If you haven't raised replacement ewes or replacement does before, I want you to be careful because, and I know you guys have all seen this phenomenon, and we talked about this before where we say, well, the bigs stay big and the littles stay little. And what ends up happening is what happens at feeding time, right? The feeding time comes and you've got some rough adult females in there that are going to push out and buffalo the youngsters. And what can happen is they are going to either hurt them or they're going to get the lion's share of the feed, and then they're not going to eat appropriately, and then you're going to have all kinds of problems. So we do tend to keep them separated, just to keep them separated out to make sure that we're not running into too much trouble. And then the next year we'll kind of put them all together and go from there. When you're reintroducing females, they will butt each other. That is normal. If you introduce new females to the flock, don't be completely taken aback if you go out there and you see your ewes or your does pounding heads with each other for a short period of time, just like your males would. They establish a pecking order, as we talked about in the beginning of the video, just like everyone else. So definitely something to keep in mind. Hello, Brian. Gabrielle, yeah, we sent you some stuff and you got it, and that's great. I'm glad that you got it. So now that you have some feed, and we know that we can ship to you in Puerto Rico and it works out well, we can do that in the future as well. So the feed that we sell on Foundation Feed, everything that we sell with some exceptions, most of what we sell is very high protein concentrated feed. And we did that for a reason. When we were developing our feed, we went to the feed manufacturer and we said, hey, we have customers all over the United States. We want a extremely high protein feed that has everything in it that they need. So the thought was, you can take our 40% mix or our 45% mix, and you can toss that into, so for instance, with the 40-pound mix or 40% mix, you can take 4 ounces of that and dump that into a pound or a couple pounds of cracked corn, and you have a complete feed for that animal. It has all the vitamins, all the nutrients, everything that you need in that feed. So that was the process behind it. So no, you don't want to feed that feed. The Ultra Buck supplement, for example, has 40% protein. So inside of, you should have got a booklet in there. If you look in the bottom of the box, if you haven't looked already, you'll have a feed conversion chart in there, and it'll tell you how much to add. So a question that we get asked by a lot of people is, what protein percentage should I be feeding my animals? And my answer to that is, it depends. So that depends on what is your goal. How fast do you want them to grow? And there are consequences to getting them to grow too fast. I will say this: you don't want them growing too fast. You'll start to see problems. You'll see problems with pasterns. It'll start to break on you. They'll put on too much weight. They'll grow too fast, and you'll start losing the pasterns. They'll start falling back in their pasterns. That's kind of, if you think of a pasterns, kind of like the ankle of the animal. If you look from where the foot goes into the leg, there's kind of an angle there. And sometimes if the animal puts on too much weight too fast, they'll kind of start to slump back there in those pasterns and their feet get weak. There is some anecdotal evidence out there that you can give them some injections. A lot of the show guys will use selenium, vitamin E in the form of Bosi to correct that, but there's no good reason as to why that would fix it. So I don't know. The problem is you feed them too hard, too fast, you have problems. The other thing is it's just total. I don't know what I don't want to say hell. Should I say hell? Okay, hell. It's just total hell on their kidneys. And that's the same thing with us as humans. You know, you've got this urea, you've got this buildup of waste from proteins being broken down, and your body has to excrete that waste. And so if you're feeding your animal anything over about 20%, 20% is about the limit. And even then you're really, really pushing it. So a heavy show feed would be like a hardcore show feed for an animal that can handle like a wool breed or a show breed that's been bred to grow really, really uh, fast. Um, you can push them on 20% and maybe get away without having long-term repercussions. But the reality is I would say 17, 18% is a really good number for you to go with. And then for average, 12% is good. 12% all complete feed is fantastic. You got to figure and so when I'm saying percentages, I'm talking about protein. And every feed has a different amount of protein. So you'll just have to learn what has what. So, your corns have about 7%, your grains um, let's see, oats, barley, things like that, they tend to run around 10 to 12. And then you start getting these huge numbers like with soybean meal's at about 40%. And so that's why most of the manufactured feeds out there have soybean meal in them. Soybean meal is used to bump up that feed. So I see a question that just came up, and we get this a lot from people that we just simply can't, from an economical standpoint, we can't ship feed to you because you're outside the United States. So people say, what can I do to increase the protein percentage in my feed? And the answer is you're either going to have to find some kind of a man-made manufactured urea that is high in protein that you could get from like a large feed manufacturer, or you can find some type of soybean base, and I'm talking about like roasted rolled soybeans, something that's been cooked, and that's for 40% protein. So you could really get a lot of bang for your buck with that. The problem again is you don't want to feed it straight. If you feed an animal, protein percentage that's getting above 20%, what it's going to do is you can actually cause kidney failure in those animals, and then you're going to lose kidney function, and then toxins will build up in the body, and the animal dies. So that's a huge issue that you obviously don't want to deal with. So yeah. Conrad. Hey, Conrad. Nice to see you. Cody Bear Ranch. It's all the Texas Cedars that do it to them. Yeah, I'll tell you, those Dorpers are really something. Bakers on a few acres. Oh, hello. Nice to see you guys. Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. So we do have some videos out there that I made like a long time ago. And when I didn't know what I was doing, I still don't really know, honestly, what I'm doing with making videos. I just kind of like try to fake it. I'm getting better though. So we've evolved to like, I have a gimbal that I use with the phone, and then I have a wireless mic, and I'm learning. So we actually do have a video where I mixed some feed back maybe a year or two ago, and I show you guys how to do the math to like calculate like how in the world do you figure out what your end protein is going to be. And I need to make a new one. Some of our original videos, the quality was not ideal. That's a very, very nice way for me to say it. The quality was not ideal. And so I need to make some updated videos, and I should do that. I've toyed around with the idea of just making a foundation feed YouTube channel, because I don't want to take away from Linessa Farms. We own foundation feed and we sell foundation feed, but I don't want, like, I always feel a little awkward talking about foundation feed because I don't want my channel to turn into like an infomercial. And even though I own the company, it's a turnoff. I get it. Like, I watch videos too, not very much, because between working at the hospital and owning the farm and doing the videos and stuff, I don't have a lot of time. But when I do have time, that I'm not reading research articles, so I can talk to you guys and at least sound like I know what the heck I'm talking about. I do watch some videos, and it's such a turn off for me when they start selling me something. I'm like, well, time to change the channel. So I don't want to get there with our feed company. And so you guys will notice I'm kind of hands off about our feed. I'm like, you can use our mineral, or, you can find it local. And I'm still a fan of that. Like, we don't rely on our feed company to make an income. It's nice. And it kind of adds, I like the fact that I can offer it. I guess is the main thing. I just like the fact that when people are in a place that they can't get anything, that we have something we can offer. But with that being said, if you can find a local person that, no kidding, that you can walk into and look eye to eye with and get what you need, like, you can't compete with that. It's so nice. And, that's with everything. And you guys know this, like, that's with local banking and everything else. It's nice to go in and know someone and to be like, hey, and you just get it and you go, and they kind of know your program and they know what you need. And I think that's the best way to do it. And plus, you're going to probably, I would hope you're going to get a better deal. The other thing that you all can do, if you live for most of you that live in the United States or Canada or anywhere in your area where there's a co-op or a grain elevator, like, you may not know this, but you can go to that big grain elevator, with all the silos and everything. You can go there and buy grain. Like, you can walk in there. You do not have to buy 50-pound bags of corn or cracked corn at Tractor Supply or Rural King or whatever. You can walk into a grain elevator or a co-op and be like, hey, can I get some whole corn, or can I get some oats, or can I get this, or can I get that? And a lot of times you can get a trailer. I know guys that go with 55-gallon garbage cans and say, hey, fill them up with corn. They're just going to weigh how much they give you, and they're going to charge you whatever the commodity price is. And some people get angry. I tell them this, and then they go and they actually do it. And, there's some anxiety about it because, you're trying something new, and they go into the co-op or the grain elevator, and then they call me. I had a guy recently, I sent him to the co-op. He called me, and he said, man, I just went in there and I got, a bushel of corn for, bushels a little over 50 pounds, I believe. And it was like half the price that he was paying at the big box store. And, like, on one hand, he was really happy because he got, he saved so much money. But on the other hand, he was mad because he's like, man, do you know how much money I've wasted on this over the past few years? And yeah, I get it. So, think outside the box. If you have local farmers, if you live in the Corn Belt, if you live in an area where these farmers have things, you can go to a local farmer that has grain storage and just be like, hey, can I buy some whole corn from you, or can I buy this, or can I buy that? And most of the guys will sell it to you right off the farm. You just got to be careful. Make sure you're not getting anything moldy. Make sure you're not getting anything with a lot of extra byproduct in there. And, you can do that. So with that being said, yeah, we'll make some new videos. We'll show you guys how to mix and make some things on your farm with the stuff that you have or the stuff that you can find, and we can go from there. So yeah, how do you get supplements in Africa, Gambia, besides what are their names? So that's a long process. And I have worked with some of our viewers that live in Africa, and really that's something that you're going to have to email me on. Just send me an email, and I'll type my email address in here so you can get it. And you guys can, if you go in the description of any of our videos, you'll see our customer service email. If you have a question, just send me an email. The Tack box is the best way to do things, for sure, because that allows me to answer your question where everybody else can see it. So, the Tack box is what I prefer, because then when I'm answering your question, I'm answering 20 other people's same question. So if you ever have a question and you think, oh, I'm embarrassed, chances are other people have that question too. So don't be embarrassed. Just feel free to ask it. If you want to email me, you can email me at this email address. It's customerservice@linessafarms.com. And I can get back to you. So what I'll do is, if you live outside the United States and you live in another area, the first conversation we're going to have is, what do you have access to? And then once we figure out what you have access to and what is your main protein source that you have, maybe it's soybean meal, maybe it's, um, fill in the blank. We can work together to figure out how to mix something up that'll work for your farm. So please send me an email. Not trying to blow you off by any means. It's too much to answer in a sitting without having enough information. Michiana living. All right. So you're close to me. Obviously, I'm in Indiana. I'm close to Michigan. Put two together. That seems to work. Newbie sheep owner. We bought lambs with a high worm load, I'm assuming is what you're going to say. Used 2 types of worm antibiotic and gave iron shots. I have one that still has scours. I don't know what else to do. Okay. So, scours, generally speaking, what causes scours? So, generally speaking, scours is caused by worms, coccidia, gastrointestinal irritation due to some kind of virus or bacteria, or a change in feed. And so if you get new animals and you're changing feed, if you can find out what they were on and slowly transition them to what you have, you can avoid scours. We expect our lambs and our goat kids to all get scours in the very early stages of them first getting on creep, when they first get on their creep feed, because that's just what they do. And they'll get it they'll get a little upset tummy for like a day or so, and it just kind of clears itself up. However, diarrhea can be multiple different things. So if you've got the scour/diarrhea, worms are appropriate to check them for. Coccidia is another one that is appropriate to check them for. And then you may also want to be checking their temperature and things like that to determine if they're running a temp. If they're running a temp, then you could be dealing with E. coli. You could be dealing with all kinds of problems. Everything has like its textbook answer. However, it doesn't mean that that's what it is. So we say, well, if you got blood in the stool, if it's watery and bloody, then you probably have coccidia. If it's, just runny in general, but still brown, it's probably worms. If it's green and it smells weird, it's probably E. coli. And all of that's really great. And all that makes sense. However, the reality is it may not be that, so don't get too pigeonholed into thinking that you know what it is. Do your basic health assessments. Check the eyelids, check for pallor, check the nose for runniness and drainage, check them and see if they're coughing, check the scours themselves and see if it's got any kind of weird odor to it. If you've smelled E. coli before, you'll know when they have it. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's E. coli. And check their temperature, check the rectal temperature to see if they're running a temp, and then kind of go from there. If I had an animal that had scours and I had treated them with worm antibiotics and they still had it, then I would assume either you're running into what we call a polypharmacy issue, where they've got too many medications too fast and it's messing them up, or you've got coccidia and you're just treating them with the wrong stuff. The only way to really know is to work with your local veterinarian and to get some stool samples going on and see if you can figure out what's going on. At this point, is it worth throwing the kitchen sink at them and hitting them with Corid, or another anti-coccidia medication? I don't know. Corid is a nasty drug that's hard on them. And so I don't really know if that's the answer at this point, especially if they're sick. I don't want you to kill them. So I hate to punt here. And so for those of you that aren't here in the United States, that's just a term we use for football when they're like, they haven't got the yardage they need to do another play, so they just kick the ball down the field. So I don't want to punt here and say call your vet, but I think at this point you should probably call your vet. And then I'm not going to beat you up too much over it because, lots of people get animals and then they get sick. So that's where I would be. I'm leaning towards coccidia if you've treated them for worms and you've done all these other things, but it's hard. It's hard to say. Here's the problem, and this happens to a lot of people. Sometimes these animals are sick. They may have a subclinical level of coccidia. They may have a subclinical worm load, whatever. And when I say subclinical, I mean they've got it, it's affecting them, but you can't see it. It hasn't manifested itself visually. And so what ends up happening is you take them out of their environment and they become stressed. You move them, you do something and they become stressed. And then what ends up happening is then that stress is just enough to knock them back to where now the coccidia really blooms and maybe it gets out of control, or the worm load really gets out of control, or they get sick. We have what's called shipping fever, that we treat animals for. A lot of guys, if they're going to ship these animals across the US, they'll give them a prophylactic antibiotic beforehand, and other medications. So it sounds to me like you're dealing with, coccidia or some type of gastrointestinal bacteria, but it's hard to say. Always, always, always with scours, and this is important for everyone to hear. Every time your animal has scours, practice good personal hygiene. It only takes a moment for you to be sweating and to rub your eyelid or to touch your mouth or something like that, touch your nose, any of these mucous membranes. Yes, you can get bugs through your eyelids. You need to be really cautious because you can get E. coli and you will be sicker than a dog. So just be cautious, and do the best that you can do. Okay. I would like to learn how to mix your products with rolled oats and decox or a different combo for kids and does. Okay, fair enough. R squared. Hello, R squared. A firewood video would be cool. Yeah, a lot of people are looking into. We've changed up the way we've done things on our farm this year. Our power bill we got last month was the highest it's ever been, and that says a lot because I'll tell you we burn through a lot here on the farm, especially during the wintertime when we've got multiple things running and de-icers running and things like that. We have started to do rainwater collection this year, and we've started to collect rainwater off of some of our pole barns. I've got a setup going on that it works really good. I'm trying to prepare myself so if we get long-term brownouts or blackouts that I'm still able to do things. I've got a 238-foot rock drilled deep hole here on my property. And so when the power goes out here, we can't even drive a shallow point, like a sand point or anything like that here. The grounds, I have solid blue clay that goes down to hard packed limestone. When the train goes through my town a mile from my house, I can actually feel the rumble here at my house. We're on a hard pan limestone. So we're doing things like, firewood. We're doing things like rainwater collection. We're doing all of these different things. And it puts us in a bad spot because, when you get into these niches with your channel, we're a sheep and goat channel. So, if you start going off-road too much and start getting into things like, should I really make a rainwater collection video? Probably not, because it's just not appealing to a lot of people. But I will say this, I think from time to time to kind of sprinkle some stuff in there, I think we're going to introduce some of those things. We may introduce a few of those kind of off the beaten path kind of videos just to give our viewers something different to watch. So I'd like to do there's some large volume firewood processing that you can do that I think would be interesting for people, and then rainwater collection as well. So something that I've thought about. We'll kind of move in that direction. I've sheep wormed with wormer for lungworms twice in 2 weeks. Still coughs, but eats and has energy. The Warrior Ranch Northwest. Hello. So yeah, lungworms can linger. You can have some effects that linger from time to time. It takes time for them for the lungs to repair themselves. And so you may be experiencing that. The other thing is anytime we have a parasite that's going to cause a wound, we always worry about subsequent infections. So, if you have an open wound on the lung surface, on the respiratory surface, where you lose a parasite, you do set that animal up for a potential infection after the fact. So I want you to monitor that animal monitor their body temperature, verify that they're not running a temp, verify that they're not like eating a lot of anything that's going to cause them dust, that they're breathing in that's irritating the respiratory surface. and then go from there. If it is, if it was just the lungworms, you wormed them and they seem to not be going off a feed, and they seem to be acting fine, but still coughing. Um, it may just be par for the course. They may just have a little bit of damage to that respiratory surface that's irritating them, and you can go that route. But I think it's important and imperative for you to check that temperature. So if they start running a temp, then you know that, hey, it's probably time for you to treat them for some type of an infection. So hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that you guys always have to watch is you got to watch dust exposure. So if you're getting dusty hay, if you're spreading lime, that's another thing that can irritate the mucous membranes in the respiratory surface, the lungs. And then diatomaceous earth is a big one. If you're, we do not advocate using diatomaceous earth because it is extremely irritable to the sinus cavity, to the lungs, and things like that, both of you and your animals. And so I get it. I get the idea of people wanting to treat their hay and stuff, and their grounds with diatomaceous earth, but it is caustic. It is damaging to the mucous membranes and to the respiratory surfaces. So something that we would advise that you avoid for your own health and for the health of your animals. And we are going to make a video sometime soon about diatomaceous earth. I just try to balance out the videos. Like, I don't want to be like doom and gloom all the time. I don't want to gripe all the time. So I want to give you like some positive things that you can do, and then kind of sprinkle in some of the things that we think you shouldn't do as well. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Howdy. On the milk maker, do I continue giving grain as well as the milk maker? So yeah, milk maker is meant to be mixed in with your feed. Again, it's really high protein. So if you look in the booklet, if you guys are ordering anything from us, it'll come with a booklet and it'll tell you how to mix that in. I think the milk maker is like 38% protein, something like that. So you'll want to mix that in with some type of other grain, feeding it to them. If you haven't been doing that, no harm, no foul. Just correct it now and know that it is meant to be mixed in with something. It's really, really high protein. And again, check your booklet for instructions on how to mix that. If you don't have a booklet for some reason, or if you accidentally threw it in the garbage because you didn't check the bottom of your box, send us an email and I will get it. Abu, hello. Bringing up this question again. I have 2 F1 generation of a hybrid sheep bred in West Africa. My ewe has been coming under heat several times, and my ram mounts her several times, but maybe you're having you kind of cut off there. So you were advised to administer on them because it could be an infection problem. Did that last month. I'm waiting to confirm pregnancy to the next 2 or 3 days. Frustrating, I would say. Okay, so I think I get the gist of what you're saying here. So, and this does happen sometimes. What can happen sometimes is that you can have a ram and they're not breeding your ewes. And this can be multiple things. This can be rams can have chlamydia that they can just run rampant and spread it to all the other ewes. Your bucks can have chlamydia as well, and that causes problems. Or they can just be not producing. They can have a low sperm load. We look at sperm sometimes under microscopes, and you've got just a handful of sperm just swimming in circles and bumping into each other. Or they've got bad tails, or something's wrong. So if we're going to turn our rams or our bucks out on a huge number of does or ewes, a lot of times we will actually check them. We'll get them sperm checked before we do that, because we want to make sure when we're putting them out that they're actually breeding. The other process that a lot of people will do, and we do this as well, is when we turn out our rams or our bucks on our ewes, we put a marking harness on them, or we use what's called rattle powder that you put on their brisket, something that they're going to mark those ewes, and you're going to see that they're marked. Once they're marked, then if we're going to keep that ram in there again, what we'll do is we'll change out the color on him after about 7 days after he's marked everyone. We'll change out the color on him, and then we'll wait and we'll see. And if 7 days goes by or 14 days goes by, and then all of a sudden he's out there and he's marking everybody again, then you know that it didn't take for some reason. And if he's marking everybody again, then your problem's with your male. There's, if you miss a few, if there's a few ewes or does that are in heat that he didn't land, then okay. If you got 20 and 2 of them get remarked, that's typical. If you've got 20 and 19 of them, 18 of them get remarked, the problem's with your male. And the male's either got some kind of reproductive issues, he's got, something wrong with him to where his sperm production is just garbage. You need to figure out what's going on there. And that's your issue. The other thing that you can do is you can run one male in there, a ram or a buck, and then after you pull them after 7 days, you can throw in a replacement ram or a replacement buck to go in there and kind of finish up behind him and pick up whatever it is that he didn't catch. But you need to be cautious, and make sure you're not, that put something in there that you don't want to have in there. But most definitely something that you want to get checked out. I would say at this point, if he's like remarking them and remarking them and remarking them, then the problem's with your male. And you need to, if you can't do the sperm samples, then you just need to pull them and get them out of there. So, Ultra Sheep Mineral plus vitamins, have 2 ewe lambs and 1 ram lamb 5 months old. Should we also have baking soda or anything else with Ultra ewe, ram and lamb mineral? So any mineral that you get from anyone, at any place, if it's free choice is great. Put out what they can clean up in a day, and then put out more that they can clean up in a day. You don't need to take your 50-pound bag or whatever it is that you got and go out there and dump it all out. Just put out what they're going to clean up in a day. Most of these minerals, if you read the instructions, it's very frustrating because you think, if you actually read what they say to give, sometimes it's like 1/2 to 1 ounce per head per day, which is a very small amount. So we don't want you to waste your mineral. And we don't want to get wet. We don't want to get stepped on and pooped on and everything else. So just put out what they need in a day. And then in addition to that, we always advise putting out free choice baking soda. It helps as a buffer for the rumen to keep the acidity and pH and everything where it needs to be. And it helps them to just stay thriftier. It helps them to prevent bloat. It helps their vitamin B uptake. All of these things matter. I don't want to get into the deep weeds of vitamin B too much, but there are certain forms of vitamin B that your body and their body. So this talk is all of you and me and them, the sheep and the goats and all of us, that we don't produce, or we can't make it. Our body can't make it. And so what ends up happening is we have we have a microbiome, we have gut bacteria that live in harmony with us. And what they do is we feed them through the food that we're eating, and then as a product of what they make some of these vitamins that we then use in our body. And so what ends up happening is if you destroy these gut bacteria through various things, like destroying them with Corid, or destroying them with antibiotics, or cooking the rumen of your animal and destroying the rumen of your animal by becoming too acidic, or what have you, you damage this microflora, you damage these good gut bacteria. They can no longer produce these beneficial B vitamins and other things that this animal or you need, and then you get these deficiencies. So, if you've ever taken a course of an antibiotic and it's caused you to get diarrhea, what you're experiencing there is the antibiotic is actually killing your good gut bacteria in your body, and it's causing you to get diarrhea. That's what's causing it. So, anytime in a clinical setting, and again, this is a sheep and goat video, not a people video, but, just to put it into perspective, when we prescribe antibiotic course to patients, we follow up with that a lot of times with a probiotic in order to get your gut bacteria back where it needs to be. And these animals are no different. You need to protect and treat that gut biome, that microbiome. And one of the best, cheapest, easiest ways that you can do that is to offer free choice sodium bicarb, which is baking soda. And it's super inexpensive for you to get. So most definitely, if you don't have free choice baking soda out there, I want you to get some free choice baking soda. And the benefit of it is if they don't need it, they won't eat it. I don't know why. And I don't know if there's a study out there that I can find that'll tell me why, but they know when to eat it. You will go days and days and days and they won't touch it. And then you put them on new pasture where they're getting clover or alfalfa or whatever, and then all of a sudden they'll gobble it all up. So they're eating legumes that are causing a decrease in pH, an increase in acid, and it's like they just know. I assume it's just a learned behavior. They learn that when my tummy hurts, I eat this and it makes it feel better. And so they just go after it. But it's very, very interesting. One of the side effects that you may see from giving increased mineral, if you've never had your animals, if your animals aren't growing hoof worth a darn. And I know some YouTubers, like, that's like a selling point to them. They're like, I never have to trim my animal's hooves. And then when I hear that, I think, yeah, that's because your animal's not getting the vitamins and nutrients that it needs. Hoof growth is a natural occurring part of life for sheep and goats. If their hoof is not growing at all, they are not getting the vitamins and nutrients that they need. I'm not talking about it growing out of control and going bananas. I'm just saying some hoof growth is normal and is natural. And so for some of you that have been like, I've never had to trim my hooves, if you start giving free choice supplements, like, you better start checking, because just like when you take a good vitamin, a supplement, you'll notice your fingernails are healthier, right? They grow better and they're healthier and stronger. Yeah, there's a reason for that. So just something for you to keep in mind. I'm interested in rainwater collection. Awesome. Okay. I think we covered that one. Cody Bear. It just rolls right off the tongue. Cody Bear. Sounds good. So it sounds, I don't know, Cody Bear, if you're as cuddly as you sound, but that's a very cuddly name. How about diatomaceous earth for lice? Diatomaceous earth, um, yeah, yeah, diatomaceous earth works. My issue with is not, so don't get misconstrued with the diatomaceous earth as far as if I'm telling you the functionality of it. So it does not function when it's wet. So I can tell you that. So oral administration of diatomaceous earth just doesn't work. And when we make the video, I'll kind of explain to you why. And I'm not like anti-diatomaceous earth or trying to like burst anyone's bubble. I just want you guys to know what works and what doesn't. Absolutely, most definitely. If lice, keds, any of those things come in contact with diatomaceous earth, it will dry them out and it will kill them. The problem is that if you dust these animals with diatomaceous earth and it gets in their eyes, if they breathe it in, if you breathe, it is not good for your lungs. Long-term exposure to this stuff is not good. When you look at diatomaceous earth under a microscope, you'll kind of get a feel for why that is. It's very sharp. It causes microabrasions, and your lungs don't respond to that very well at all. And again, I don't want to get into people medicine too much, but long-term exposure to dust and chemicals causes fibrosis in the lung tissue. Think of it as like when you develop calluses on your hands. When you use tools over and over and over, you develop calluses on your hands where those tools have worn. And so what ends up happening is when you deal with a new tool where your hands haven't been worn before, what happens? Well, you get a blister and you get a callus, right? Think of your lung tissue as the same thing. If you smoke, if you're breathing in chemicals, if you're breathing in dust, your lung tissue feels the need to toughen up in response to this. And over time, you develop what's called fibrosis. These animals are the same way. If you want them to have good lung health, which we do because we don't want them getting sick with things like pneumonia and other things like that. And let's be honest, good lung health is good health. Good pulmonary health is important if you're a goat, a sheep, or a human. So we don't want to give them anything that's going to damage that. I am not going to go down the road of comparing diatomaceous earth to asbestos. That would be way out of line. I'd be way out of line to do that. What I will tell you is the same type of process is happening with asbestos. Is irritation due to what it is causes damage to the lungs, and then that damage causes other problems. And so with diatomaceous earth, I would never in a million years want to expose my kids or myself to that dust. And so I don't want you to do that either. And when I say kids, I mean like human children, not goat kids, but not goat kids either. So just something for you to consider. So, Michiana living, we're north in Elkhart. Okay. Yeah, you're not too far away. White mucous membranes, dehydrated, not eating, and scours were the only symptoms. Ivermectin, a week later, white wormer, all eating and active, with one with scours, eating and active. In that case, it may just be worms, and they may have a slow response to it. You can try activated clay, the activated clay that you can get at like Tractor Supply or whatever, and that may help. You can try kaolin, that may help. I don't want to steer you down the road of using spectinomycin, the spectam or the scour halt, because that's really an antibiotic, and I don't really know if that's warranted in this situation. I'm always hesitant to talk about kaolin or activated clay, because I don't want you to give your animal something that's going to stop them up if they have an active bacterial infection. One of the worst things you can do for a human or for an animal that has like E. coli infection or something like that is give them something that's going to cause them to stop. It's actually important and beneficial for them to get that out of their system. But at some point, things can kind of run out of control. If it is a worm load, and if you did worm them, and if they do seem to be doing better, and this one still got a little bit of scours, what's the chances of him having something different than everybody else? Probably not that much. He's probably just the weakest link in the bunch. In that case, I would say try the activated clay, try some kaolin, or something like that. That's going to be a little bit more gentle on him to coat that stomach and soothe it, and go from there. Just make sure that he's getting plenty of fluid, so you can add some molasses to his water. You can add blue light, something like that, and see where it goes. That would be my best advice at this point. The other thing that you guys need to consider is worming with any means, chemical worm or copper sulfate, anything at all. It doesn't always fix the underlying problem. Some animals just do not have any resistance, be it inherited or just born with it, whatever. They just do not have any resistance to worms, and they're never going to have any resistance to worms. And so over time in your flock, and we're going to talk about this more coming up very soon, because culling your animals is a huge part of worming and keeping your flock free from worms and parasites. And really, you're going to find that some of these animals, you're going to treat the same animals over and over and over and over, and you're going to worm them, and then you're going to worm them again, and you're going to worm them, and you're going to worm them again. And it's like they have no resistance whatsoever. And those are the animals that'll mess up your flock, because you want to talk about how worm resistance happens. Well, worm resistance to chemical wormers happens because people just overworm. Back when I was raising sheep, when I was a kid in the 80s, we would have 300 sheep, and they would just worm every single one of them. They didn't even look at their eyelids to see if they had pallor or anything. They would just run them all through the crush and run them all through and drench every one of them. And you would do it when you turned them out on pasture, and you would do it before breeding, and you would do it in the fall, and you would just do it all the time. And nobody thought anything of it. And then all of a sudden it didn't work anymore. So we tried to get away from that. And what we tried to do is we tried to get to where we're like, okay, we're just going to treat the animals that need it. That's where Famantia, the American bastardized form of Famantia, kind of doesn't deal with things either, because they need to incorporate the South African form of Famantia, which is way more advanced. They talk about culling and why that's important, because even if you're checking eyelids, if you're just checking eyelids and over medicating all the time, then you're still going to develop worm resistance. So the thought is you got to identify those animals that can't help themselves and can't stay wormed, and you got to get rid of them, so you don't cause more problems on your flock. And that's hard to do. Getting rid of livestock is hard to do. I've got a good friend of mine that just really started getting into sheep and goats. I don't want to mention his name on here, but it rhymes with Scott. And he's getting started with sheep and goats, and he's already got emotional connection. I went over to his farm last weekend, and I was like, that one needs to go, that one needs to go, that one needs to go, that one needs to go. I'm just looking at him like, they're not my animals. I don't have a dog in the race. And he's like, that one was the first one born on the farm. And look, we've all got this, right? You're like, well, that one's my favorite. and that one is really cute, and that one was the first one, and we've all got these reasons, and it's tough. But when we made a video about this where we talked about it, like, you can drive your farm into the dirt by not being able to snap yourself out of that. It is not fun. Nobody wants to be like the cold, heartless person on their farm, but you gotta look at your animals. When you look at who you're going to keep and who you're going to get rid of, it goes beyond, who's having babies and who's not, and who's a good mom and who's not, or who's a good dad and who's not, and who's having twins and all that stuff. You got to also look at their health. If you're constantly having to worm them, if you're constantly having to do things like that, they got to go, because you're going to hurt. You're going to hurt all of them. You're going to hurt yourself, and you're going to hurt all of them, all of the animals that you have, by keeping that animal around. And these problems compound themselves. So now you're going to keep animals that you shouldn't, and those animals are going to start having babies, and those babies are going to have problems too. We have animals on our farm. For as much as I get beat up by some people about not free ranging all year round, which we just can't do here, I have animals on dry lot. I've got sheep and goats here on my farm that I have not wormed in 2 to 3 years. Not one time. I don't have to. They come through my crush, or I'm out, I lay hands on them and I look at them, and their eyelid is like red, red, red. And their babies tend to be that way too. I may have to worm the babies a few times when they're young just to get it out of their system. But yeah, we have a majority of our animals, we do not worm that often. So while the copper sulfate and all of these things are good, and you can feel good about the fact that you're giving a more natural, non-chemical wormer that they're not going to develop resistance to, if you if you're having to worm them every month, you're kind of missing the point. The genetics, while I want you to use natural worming methods to help protect the animals that you do have, and to just be a good steward or stewardess, or I don't know what the term would be, to be a good animal husbandry person. You still have to get rid of the ones that can't keep a worm load off of themselves. So just something I feel like I just made a whole video there all at once. So just, when the video comes out, still watch it. Anyways, I'll try to add some entertaining stuff in there. So, okay. Brian, would putting out baking soda for free choice be good for animals on dry? Yeah. Any baking soda, anytime. On the dry lot, you'll find that they don't really eat it as much as they do on pasture. Like, they really go after it on pasture. And I think it's just the fresh legumes, like, alfalfa and clover and stuff like that. I think they get more bloat off of that, and they tend to go after it, but they'll still go after it on dry lot as well. We offer it on dry lot as well. So good question. Thank you. Jen, I have a ewe that coughs several times throughout the day. It's when she eats. I think she may be eating too fast. Is that a bad assumption? It sounds dry, and when she's eating, she coughs. Cough is, some animals have chronic cough. A lot of club lambs and club goats have chronic cough, and the verdict is still out as far as exactly why they get it. The thing that really you have to watch too is if you're noticing any kind of like rectal prolapse when they're coughing, that's an issue as well. That may just be that they're overeating, they're eating too much. So a lot of people like to say, well, if you dock the tails too close, you're going to cause rectal prolapse. I think overfeeding, it causes way more rectal prolapse than close docking. I'm not advocating for close docking. It's too bad that that's the show standard that has to be done if these kids want to compete. But I'm not advocating it. But I am saying that a lot more rectal prolapses are caused by overfeeding than anything else. That intestine it's too full and it doesn't have anywhere to go. So when these animals start coughing, you'll notice rectal prolapse, and it'll just kind of come out and then it'll just go back in. Coughing can be from overeating. Maybe they're not drinking enough water. We have a few animals on our farm that just like to go nuts when it's feeding time, and it's like you could give them 2 tablespoons of food and they're going to eat it too fast. We have a buck that's that way, and so what you'll see sometimes is you'll get what's called cud spilling, where They may get green, like around the mouth where they're barfing up hay and stuff. You may notice foaming at the mouth where they're eating too fast. So it's up to you as far as what you want to do. Sometimes they just eat hay too fast and they're breathing in dust. Dusty feeds overall are not good for them. But a lot of times, they stick their head in a feed trough or they stick their head in a hay bale and they're huffing and puffing in dust at the same time that they're eating, and that can just irritate the lungs. I would say if you notice coughing only when they're eating and only when they're just done eating, and you're not noticing any kind of vomiting or any kind of regurgitation of any sign, and then the rest of the day you're not noticing much coughing at all, I would say they're just, it's the way they're breathing when they're eating, and it's probably more than likely no harm, no foul, but something to keep an eye on. Obviously, anytime we're hearing coughs and stuff on the farm and it's not typical for that animal, we obviously want to check temperature and things like that to make sure that that animal is not coming down with some type of a respiratory bacteria, something like pneumonia or something like that. Playing on fence, last part of my land, I have almost 7 feet tall grass. Holy smokes. Would you trim that grass? No, maybe. I don't know. It depends on what they're going to eat, how much they're going to eat. We'll put animals on pasture. First time that we cut our animals loose on pasture in May, usually the grass is so high that I can't even see them. Like we'll turn them loose on it and they just disappear into the field. And while that does hold a lot of heat and a lot of humidity, I think that it's important to let them trample that stuff down. They tend to trample that down, and it'll just create carbon that'll help build up that field a little bit better. So I would trim it as much as you feel you absolutely need to, but they'll trample it down pretty quick. So leave it if you can. I don't think you have to worry about it causing too much issues. But I'll leave that up to you. Magpie. Hello, Magpie. She's leaving. I've got to go back to work. Ugh. That's awful. That's so awful that you have to go back to work. Every night after I finish doing this, I just go to bed and then I get up and I go back to work the next day. And to be honest with you, after about an hour of talking, I almost lose my voice. Little known fact about Tim, I actually was a drill instructor in the military, believe it or not. I don't know if that's believable or not, but it's the truth. So I was a drill instructor in the military back in 2002 for a few years, and I destroyed my voice and my vocal cords. Essentially, I damaged my vocal cords really, really bad. So even now when I teach, after about a day, if I have to teach a course at the hospital for like a day, forget it. I'll lose my voice for like a whole day or two. And even after talking for an hour on our live streams, I can feel it, like I'm starting to lose my voice. So it is what it is. Let that be a lesson to all of you. Don't yell at people. And if you're going to, don't yell too much because you can damage your vocal cords. Jess, question about copper sulfate as a dewormer. I've heard people just put a handful in the water rather than drench. Obviously, it'd be very dilute, but what's your opinion on this? That's just laziness, and I get it, and it's appealing, but it's like, you're not getting. See, this is how, and I don't think that this would cause worming resistance, but like you can go there with me mentally and see how this causes problems. It's like, I'm going to give like sub therapeutic levels of a medication to an animal for what purpose? I don't know. The university studies, like the University of Kentucky study, when they talk about how much they give the animals, they did quote unquote overdose the animals with copper sulfate just to see like, okay, what's our treatment window here? In medicine, we worry about a treatment window. When it comes to medications, we say, okay, if I give this patient just a little bit too much, is it going to hurt them? Is it going to kill them? And then that determines when things get like FDA approved and things like that. So you can imagine like Tylenol, like if you have a headache and I tell you to take 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol and that fixes it, that's great. What happens if you accidentally took like 1,500? Like if it killed you to take 1,500, like that would be a bad treatment window, and we would want to avoid that. And then there's also treatment window on the bottom end. Like if you don't take enough, is it actually going to have any therapeutic effect? When it comes to copper sulfate, volume of fluid is very important. So that's one of the questions that we get asked a lot by people, and that's an annoyance to people, is they say, I don't want to drench my animal with 100 milliliters of copper sulfate. That is awful. I don't like doing it. It sucks. And I get that. But here's the way that the copper sulfate works. By giving such a large amount of that copper sulfate solution, it adequately coats the animal's intestinal or stomach lining, fourth stomach lining, and again getting into those intestines, and it creates enough surface area that it completely coats that stomach or that intestine, and all of the worms are exposed to that copper sulfate, and it damages them, and then they're passed out. If you were to give a much smaller amount, like let's say 5 milliliters or something like that, the volume itself just wouldn't be enough to adequately cause exposure for those worms. I suspect that if you just threw some copper sulfate in the water, that perhaps they might get enough that it's going to damage them. They may not. A tad bit of copper sulfate in your waters would help control things like algae. But with that being said, just a large water, you can simply squirt like 5 milliliters, 3 to 5 milliliters of bleach in there from time to time, and it'll keep it clean up as well. So, I feel like I would be doing you a disservice if I said treat them that way. I've seen it. I've read articles, Jess. So don't get me wrong. I was recently reading an article by a vet from, I don't want to say for sure, but I want to say it was Maryland. I can't remember if it was Penn State or if it was out of Maryland. I can't recall, but he said it was a vet, and he's like, well, they used to worm with copper sulfate, and so I always sometimes I'll toss a handful in my, water, just for good favor, and I don't know if it's doing him any good or if it's not. So, plus then it's like, what happens when you get a really thirsty animal that comes up there and drinks a ton of it? Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if it's worth it. The other thing that you'll notice with copper sulfate is it will straight up destroy anything with metal in it that you, any hoof rot. You can make copper sulfate solution for hoof rot for a foot bath for animals um, running through a containment system. But a lot of guys won't do that because any metal that copper sulfate interacts with, it'll just corrode the heck out of it and tear it up. And so if you've got any kind of metal water and you add a copper sulfate to that, what you're going to see is that metal is going to have a reaction with that metal, and it's going to cause some problems. And so there's my other thing with copper sulfate. And that's why I say I always want you guys mixing copper sulfate. When you're mixing your solution, I want you to ideally use like distilled water or some kind of really good clean water. I don't want you using well water. I don't want you using soft water out of your water softener, because those copper ions, copper interacts with lots and lots of different elements. And so what you don't want to happen is you don't want to have like really high iron water and then dump copper in there and then have the copper and the iron interact with each other, and then it changes the chemical composition and it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. Same thing, soft water, if you have some salt, some sodium or other things that are in your water, I don't want the copper interacting with that and going off either. And so that's what makes me wonder. Another thing, now that I've pondered it over the last 5 minutes, is, if I'm adding copper sulfate to a metal tank and I can see that it's having a chemical reaction with that metal, which it will corrode. That tells me that copper is no longer in its original form, at least to the point that it was before. It may be interacting and it may be changing, and that just can't be good either. So I'm just going to say, no, don't do it. and then we'll just call it that. And you can tell your friends, be like, Tim said no. So there you go. Jen and Steve's Homestead Shenanigans. I like that name, the shenanigans part. It's like I'm getting in trouble, but I'm not getting in so much trouble that my mother would disapprove. I'm so new to sheep. Had them for a month. Copper is a scary word for me. When should I stay away from copper and when shouldn't I? Or always stay away from it. So there are a few sheep breeds that need copper, but we're not going to talk about that. I believe it's Icelandic. Don't quote me on that. I shouldn't even say things if I don't know for sure, but I think it's Icelandic. Actually need copper, but for all intents and purposes, just keep sheep away from copper. Bad juju, bad things. Copper sulfate is the exception. And if you don't know why, then you got to go to our videos and I will explain it to you. Otherwise, people are going to start giving me a thumbs down on this video because they've heard it so many times. I'm just joking. I don't even think there's a thumbs down. So yay for that. But long story short, copper sulfate. If you go to our copper sulfate videos, you can see that. Guys, gals, if you haven't checked it out, go to our copper sulfate videos, go to the description, read. I know it's not like the most fun thing in the world, but read the University of Kentucky study on copper sulfate worming. I really think it's a great read because it also talks about the history of copper sulfate worming and how they used to use it and other things that they did. It's actually very, very interesting. If you read the study, your brain will grow a little bit and you'll just feel better about yourself. And then when you go to work, you can actually, when you're hanging out with your friends and you don't have anything to talk about, you can be like, hey man, do you want to hear about copper sulfate worming of sheep? And they may say no, and then you just tell them anyways. Because when you teach someone, it actually helps to for you to remember it and store those memories as well. So if you want to be a copper sulfate guru, you got to tell your friends about copper sulfate, even if they don't want to hear about it. Brian, since you're on the copper sulfate, like we always get on, what would be a good mixture to use for a foot bath? I've been told 1.5 cups mixes 1 gallon of water. Can't find anything on the mixture. I know the zinc sulfate mix is 1 quart. I don't remember. I'll have to look it up and see. I'll have to look in the Merck vet manual. I don't have it handy. I do have it handy, but not handy enough that anybody's going to tolerate me thumbing through the Merck veterinary manual. But I will look and see if I can find that. I don't know. Give me some time. Let me see what I can come up with for you. I apologize. So yeah. Yes, I've caught up on all the questions. And we did okay. We're at 1 minute and 17 seconds. So, or pardon me, 1 hour, 17 minutes. So we didn't go too far over. So I will see you guys again next Wednesday. Videos. I don't know. We've got Open Class Sheep Show coming up this Saturday at the fair that my girls are showing in. And then next week's the fair here in the county. So I don't know. I have no idea. I always have planned videos. I'm like, I'm going to make a video about this. I'm going to make a video about that. And then I'm like, I can't. And then something happens. And then I go off road. I always think I have these great ideas for videos. And then, you guys send me a question and I was like, man, I need to make a video about this and I'll just do it. So who knows what the videos this week will be about. I know I have some ideas, but I don't want to say it out loud because I'll just mess it up. So anyways, Bob Ross was a drill sergeant. But who doesn't like Bob Ross? That guy's awesome. Brian said it's okay. Take your time to get back with me and I'll do that. So, all right, everybody. You know the drill. I am Tim from Linessa Farms, specialty in heirloom livestock. Thanks for joining me again, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next week. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. If you haven't hit the thumbs up yet, if you do that, that would be great. Helps other people get our videos. Yeah. All right. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for joining us again. I really appreciate it.